So first of all, let me welcome everyone to the 3 Trends for the Future of Supply Chain. I'm Stephanie Ness. I'm Vice President of Sales here at UC Boss. I'll be your host for the discussion. The discussion today is really talking about change, and change is really a mainstay in the supply chain world today. And we're making some massive shifts just in the last couple of months. Massive changes, certainly in 2020, and a lot more to come. So technology is really playing a big part in that transformation. And we want to show some new ways to be able to solve the problem. In our discussion today, we're going to focus on 3 technology trends: agility, data, and no-code. We hope that you'll learn and help you utilize your existing tools, and create a supply chain that will help you. Let me get started. First, let me introduce our panel. I think that we can hear our panel. Kim, can we hear you? Maybe.
Hi,
okay.
How are you?
Oh, great.
Sorry, my Zoom keeps crashing, so I apologize. I have no idea why that's happening.
Because we're doing
maybe
this.
Because we have so many attendees. I think that's what the issue is. So I apologize.
That's exactly it. So we have with us Kim Reuter, who is the Managing Partner and Chief Consultant at CSG Consulting. We also have Matt Turner, who is a Strategic Advisor and Technologist, and he's currently advising here at UC Boss. And of course, we have myself, and I will do a quick introduction of myself as well. Kim, if you would like to maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself and some of the things that you're focusing on.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Reuter, and I am the Chief Consultant at CSG Consulting. And I am an expert, so many people say, in supply chain management and global expansion specific to e-commerce. So I work with a lot of companies on designing and implementing process and technology solutions to support their e-commerce business, whether or not they're just getting into direct-to-consumer or they have an existing business that they're looking to streamline and make more efficient. I also specialize in working on global expansion for direct-to-consumer companies and helping them expand specifically into European countries in the EU and making sure that they have a seamless experience. So I love the work that I do. I've been in the industry for over 20 years. I started as a broker freight forwarder on the East Coast, still a licensed customs broker. That's where my global expansion passion comes from. And I spent 7 years at Amazon developing all of their global e-commerce businesses, including Amazon Global and Global FBA. And then went on to work at Nordstrom, working in omni-channel solutions and helping modernize their supply chain technology. And now I take all of that knowledge and share it with my clients. Perfect.
And Matt, maybe you could share a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And I want to say, Kim, that I'm going to join you in loving my work, but I come from almost the opposite angle, from the tech and the data and the information side into this world of supply chain. So I've really been involved with information systems, making sure people get the right information at the right time. So back, information industry stuff, media stuff, did a lot of work in manufacturing, which involves some supply chain. But as this technology world has kind of shortened all the cycles, it turns out it's a key element to success in any of these industries, but especially in supply chain, where there's so much data, there's so much riding on being able to match it together, that original skill that we started back in just the original getting people information in all formats, that's becoming this real constant. So that's my background. As Steph mentioned, I'm advising UC Boss. I'm also working with a couple of other companies and keeping this whole information thread going. Previously, I worked at a database company and had a lot of experience explaining why data is important. And I'm really happy to be here today talking with all of you. And I think, Steph mentioned UC Boss, and it's a really unique opportunity that I see to tell you and many other people the story of how this technology is going to be impactful and the ways in which you can actually combine not just the data, but being able to put it into action. And that's kind of the content we have lined up. So I'm really excited to get into it.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate it. Maybe I could tell a little bit about myself as well. I began UC Boss just a few months ago as we launched the product. And I was so intrigued and interested that I joined. And so I'm finding it to be a wonderful experience. My past, I've been working in the data and transformation, helping organizations in their data journey and how to take data and turn it into information. And I've been doing that for a few decades. We won't say how many decades. Kim and I have discussed that. It's not appropriate. Some of the clients that I've worked with, I've worked in publishing, so HMH and Pearson. I've also done intelligence work, where I've done some work with the DIA. I've also worked with Boeing and Lockheed. So I've worked in many different aspects. And all those aspects really come down to data and information and how do we make it easily accessible. So maybe now we can move a little bit to talk about, excuse me, talk about what's happening in supply chain right now. In the news, Kim, maybe you could fill us in and tell us what you think is the most important thing that's happening today.
So as we know, like supply chain is on fire right now, and you can't even like get on the news and not talk about supply chain. So what are the three things that I am seeing, the biggest things that I'm seeing happening in supply chain right now are, one, in the beginning of the pandemic, there was this huge push for omni-channel, right? So all of a sudden companies that were doing just retail or were relying mostly on retail suddenly had to like leverage all this inventory they had locked up in stores. And a lot of them were not prepared for it, or they're using antiquated systems, or, they had no idea like how to start leveraging all of this inventory that they had. So omnichannel has been at the top of the list. And that includes things like fulfill from store, pick up at the curbside, filling your online orders from store inventory. So omnichannel is top of the list. The second thing we saw happen was shipping. All of a sudden, everybody knew their UPS driver. Everything was about UPS, FedEx, USPS. What's going on? When am I going to get my package? And as we got into the holiday season, we've had this issue happen in the past, but not quite at the scale that carriers started to meet the cap early in the process. So early December, retailers had no outlet for shipping, or they were trying to pivot between shippers, depending on shipping methods. And it became a really big, hairy mess. So shipping has been a big issue. It continues to be an issue. It wasn't just a peak season issue this year. It continues to be a challenge across the board. I was just talking on a call this morning where someone mailed a package and mailed their tax bill. And it took 3 weeks to go 15 miles. So we're still seeing problems in shipping. And then, of course, now, if you are in retail and you had a banner year, what companies did, if your sales are up 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, guess what? Your returns are up 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So now we're seeing this huge reverse logistics wave that's coming back into retailers. They're not prepared for it. Most retailers don't even have a great return process flow and data flow to begin with. It is always the last thing everybody talks about. We have some information that we'll share here a little bit later, but returns is the biggest challenge that we're seeing right now in the supply chain. A couple of things about supply chain and returns is that when you look at the industry will tell you that returns are 4 to 8%, right? Let me tell you something, that is an average. And that includes groceries, auto parts, medical supplies, anything that's bought online. But if you're in a retail business, specifically apparel, shoes, fashion, any of those types of businesses, you're looking at 50 to 80% return rates. And you multiply that times the amount that your business has grown in the past year, you are looking at a gargantuan pile of clothing coming back to you. And that is revenue that is just sitting there that you cannot recoup until you get it back into a selling position. So a lot of the customers I'm talking to, or my clients that I'm talking to right now, are really stressed out about returns and how they're going to try to optimize that. It's really brought the return issue up to the forefront.
Which is wonderful, because we're hoping to give some suggestions on how to solve that. Matt?
Yes.
Matt, you recently joined the supply chain world, or not really, but you're learning a lot more about it. How's that? Maybe you could give us a little perspective of what you think from what you're seeing and what you've heard.
And not having Kim's experience, but being able to, and same thing for you, Steph, or where, the conversations we've been having, be able to join some of these communities talking about supply chain, the rate of change, the impact of the rate of change, and the willingness of an industry to adopt it and think about it and really understand the scale is something that's really struck me. I mean, supply chain's in the news in almost every way in our current environment. The shortages, the impact of disruption of the buyer's habits, dramatic disruption of buyer habits, skyrocketing e-commerce. We're going to talk a little bit about, the result that has on things like returns, but it also has a result of the public being very aware of supply chain. And that's a change. It also has
doesn't change.
Yeah, it also has, and I think that's great. We were doing some of the prep around this and talking about, this topic. And as a Twitter handle out there, and maybe someone who's on knows the genesis behind it. But supply chain is boring was the content, was the handle, and I think that was a way that and it is, and you want to be very normalized and control, and you really need to have a solid supply chain. But you need to do all that now in a very exciting time of change. And Kim and I both attended some of the retail conferences coming in the spring, and people were talking about, just in January, and people were talking about having 10 years of innovation and change in the first 9 months of the pandemic. And that's being able to look back at it, and it's still going on.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not stopping, right? Our online sales have tripled. That's also means that we're going to have lots of returns, and reverse logistics and returns becomes a big part of an organization. I read last week that 8% of retail revenue is in returns, and that's a lot of money. Something like $40 billion in returns for 2021. So those are the types of challenges that we're really working to help. If we can, just 1% of that 40 billion would be a huge advantage. One of the other articles was talking about how $40 billion would basically be the second largest company.
And we talked a little bit about the scale and the change. So the stuff that the reality of how much is happening inside the industry that Kim just laid out is playing out with people wanting to tackle new challenges. And I think that's kind of where I come in, or what I've been able to latch onto, which is that people are thinking about new ways of adopting it. People are thinking about how can I bridge some of these gaps. People are thinking about getting some of those values. So Kim, your work to highlight it, and a lot of other folks that we've been, been ardently following the folks at Supply Chain Now, and some of the other content providers out there. That's actually beginning the cycle of thinking about new ways, and that for me is kind of the biggest thing. Kim, I think Steph, at this point, I think we were going to go and ask a poll question.
Indeed, we are.
And so one of the things we wanted to do was to see how that played out among the audience. And this could be either your own organization or just people you're working with, kind of where do you think they fit? So I'm sorry, Steph, if you wanted to introduce the poll.
Yeah, no problem. Really what we're trying to understand here is how much the projects that you're working on, how many of the projects, we'll get this eventually, how many of the projects are actually new innovation, new functionality, new technology? How much are maintenance or enhancements or incremental? And how much is just maintenance? That's really, we're giving you percentages to kind of give us an idea. We're curious to see what's happening out there.
Yeah, we're wondering, in the face of all this change, are people able to get out of that maintenance, incremental churn? Or, maybe that's the challenge. And so we were hoping that you guys could give us a little bit of perspective.
Yep, that'd be great. Okay, maybe we could talk a little bit about the subject. And since Matt was the one who wrote the article, let's hear a little bit of his perspective on agility, data, and NoCode.
So for me, it was a good introduction or reintroduction into the space when I began to talk with people like Kim and hear just how fast things were changing, and how really real the need is to match and up level into a lot of these solutions. I started thinking about my experiences, but a lot of people who've done technology adoption, when you're faced with a big time of crisis and there's a lot of new technology, it's not necessarily a great idea to go and buy technology X, technology Y. Sometimes it's a good idea to take a step back and think about the strategy behind it. And so when we looked at, when I came up with these ideas, we started with agility, which I think is something that should be fairly obvious. Things are changing, you need agility, but it's a really deep question. And it's a deep question for a lot of project teams to think about agile methodology versus traditional methodology, especially in a space that really is requiring a lot of precision and enterprise readiness and things that need to be very solid. Can't screw up your supply chain, but you do need to be able to react. And there's a big practice at that level, agile tools, agile practices. But what I find really interesting is when you go the next level up, you think about agility and you start talking about agile planning, thinking about involving the whole company into realizing that, you don't have a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan, you have an evolving set of goals and you're actually working towards those goals. And that's a really interesting thread to go down. There's been some great thinking about that. My colleague who does a CIO newsletter called the book called Driving Digital, and a CIO newsletter business called Agile CIO, my friend Isaac Sikolik, has been really good about bringing those things together and talking about it. And there's our poll results, so we'll get back to that in a second. And it also dovetails with a lot of what Gartner is talking about, where organizations maybe stop thinking about specific outputs, stop thinking about specific products, but think about capabilities. And there's this idea of the composable enterprise where you begin to focus on capabilities, and that gives you this agility. So agility is not a goal, it's a practice. And it's also it's a very deep subject because it can really lead to talking about organizational change, as well as your ability to execute right now. And I wanted to start there. So we have this idea of agility coming first. Also because it was probably pretty familiar for everybody. And I think data also fits that same model. The idea around data is that it does drive everything. I think if this was more of a data conversation, I could have asked the question, has anybody got a tagline for data? And somebody would have come up with, hey, it's the new oil. People are talking about it everywhere. Everybody's a data business. And there's a lot more to that statement than simply getting all your data together. So the data aspect of why it's going to be crucial to think about data, think deeply about data, and think about how you can actually map it, bring it together, and not just get visibility on something, but be able to act on the data as the data is changing. And that actually leads you to another really critical part of data, which is being able to predict, being able to get in front of problems that data is going to. So you need to have a very strong data practice to just be able to act. And that same strong data practice is going to help you get ahead. One of the things I learned from you, Kim, is this whole notion of in supply chain, getting ahead is critical. If you aren't on top of a problem, it literally builds up. The boxes in the warehouse stack up.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Yep.
It doesn't stop.
It doesn't stop. And
No.
so, but you can't get there unless you have the strong data. Kim, if you want to say reflector.
Yeah. It's all about flow. I've taught a couple classes on importing like a pro. Import processes are one of my passions. And the minute you have a stutter in any sort of supply chain, everything just backs up on it. Way back in the day, I used to support Ford supply chain out of Detroit. And we did what was called aircraft on ground clearance. So the Ford supply chain and manufacturing was called just in time, and it was run so tightly that if they ran out of a product, it would cost them $1 billion a day to shut down. Now, this was a few years ago, so I'm sure that number is much higher now. But it was $1 billion a day for them to shut down their supply chain if we ran out of a part. So, when people talk about the importance of supply chain, not only is supply chain important, but having the data to ensure that you are running a supply chain proactively is the key to success. Because the minute you get behind, the dollars just start racking up one after another, and it's not only just the cost of the supply chain, the demurrage, the storage, the drayage, the reworking containers, all of those things, but it's also the impact on you're out of inventory, your manufacturing is being shut down. The downstream effects are catastrophic.
And for me, what you said about having the data, that's one of the that's why I highlighted this for just such a crucial trend, because it's not just you just go get a pile of your data and everything's fine.
No.
You know, you don't just back up if data's new oil, you don't just back up your data pump over all your, there's a lot of work to bring data together and make it actionable. So I wanted to really double click on that. The third concept that we wanted to talk about is no code. And this might be relatively new for people. The idea of putting together systems, putting together solutions without having to involve deep technical expertise to build it from scratch on top of the data, on top of these systems, instead using tools. And we're here as part of UC Boston. It's one of these tools that's built these capabilities to configure pathways for data, but also be able to configure systems, views, and actions on the data without having to code. It's a relatively new idea. If people are absolutely new to it, we're happy to educate on it. If you've heard of it, and you might be skeptical, because a lot of people who are really core, I came from a world where I built everything. And it does take you a few moments to think about what would it be like if I didn't have to go get that data access person, the middleware developer, the UI developer. What would change? Would I be able to deliver it? And the answer, when you focus on an industry and you have the expertise, is yes. When that answer is yes, think about what changes. Think about how quickly you can bring together solutions. Think about the footprint that you need to have as a technical team to deliver solutions, and how that could change from having a lot of expertise, but then having either business analysts or people who understand the process create solutions, or even this whole mounting or developing trend of citizen developers, where actual end users are able to participate and build their solutions. So much can change in this world when you start thinking about no code. And that's why we wanted to bring it into this conversation, because in the supply chain, you need this solid foundation of data. You have rapidly changing solutions, rapidly changing environments. So things have to be flexible. And that means you need a way to bring up solutions quickly, bring up solutions that are resilient so they can survive when things change, and bring them up very, very effectively into these environments where you can't wait 2 years for development. You can't create something new over these long lifespans. So it's funny, Kim and I were talking about no code, and we came up with one of the possible outcomes is you might begin to build tools for very small audiences, a very small team, or even a tool for one person. And imagine in your very large organization that you had that kind of flexibility. So for no code, it's about learning about it, bringing it into the conversation, but then imagining what's possible and thinking about the big benefits, the big leap forward that's possible for it. So that's what we wanted to invite you guys. Those are our themes: agility, data, and no code. And kind of that's what we're hanging our hat on for the webinars, to give some familiar ground like agility and data, and give you guys a little bit of visibility into no code.
So Kim, tell me what you first thought when you heard about agility and no data. What was your first thought?
I was skeptical. I was like, yeah, whatever, sell me something new. I just, recently, one of the new things that have been out recently, everybody talks about headless commerce now, right? Mm-hmm. This headless e-commerce development. And I remember when people started first talking to me about that, I was like, what is it? And then I looked, I kind of investigated and I looked it up and I was like, oh, okay. So it's just customized websites. And so when no code came along, I was like, well, what is this? I was a little bit skeptical about it. And then I had a great conversation with Matt, and he showed me the ability and how fast that you could change or alter, specifically in supply chain. And I could really see the value in why companies could use this. And Matt just mentioned, waiting 2 years for something to be developed. In today's e-commerce world, we don't have 2 weeks. Okay. So this is no longer about 2 years. This is about what can I put in place right now or by the end of the week to support all of these things that are shifting so quickly in the e-commerce world. So I was super intrigued. And of course, as soon as Matt showed me what it was, I became a believer.
So what do you think about some of the problem areas? Where do you think some of the best? By the way, I want to mention, if you're looking at the poll, that 5%, less than 5% innovation, and that's kind of, so Kim, I wanted to tee up the answer to that, but that less than 5% innovation is a lot of why people are thinking about no code.
Yeah.
We need to transfer that budget
Yeah.
Need to have more innovation. We have to be faster.
So repeat your question again, Matt. I completely forgot already.
Actually, yeah, that's the last one. So when we started talking about if no code could work, you were thinking about areas you could apply it, like the retail in-store. We just talked a little bit about reverse, and then
Return.
I want to come back to the return, but I love the carrier. The carrier conversation was quite eye-opening.
Yeah, the carrier conversation is super interesting, especially when you're working at scale, right? So a lot of big e-commerce companies and even 3PLs, right? They're typically working with a bunch of different carriers, and they have dock doors set up per carrier, depending on how antiquated their technology is, and they have Gaylord set up, and there's this physical setup in order to run a warehouse and outbound very effectively. And then, you start at that end. So let's start at the dock door. That leads back into where packages are going to be sorted to. That leads back into what kind of shipping options are we offering the customer. That leads back into like the customer experience, the actual website. So, something that seems as simple as, what truck pulls up to which door at a warehouse has implications all the way back through the e-commerce journey. And that's one of the big things about e-commerce, and that I'm always preaching about, is that if you look at e-commerce, I run into people all the time who look at e-commerce and they're like, oh, it's all about marketing in the website. And I'm like, no, if you can't get the package to the customer when you said you're going to get it to them, nothing else matters. That is the only physical experience a customer has, is getting their package at their door. So you have to nail that every single time. So when we started talking about shipping and the complexities around shipping and the work it would take to shift a line, to change a ship method, all of these things, when and a lot of these companies I've worked with in the past have old technology because they're old retail companies and they just tried to put e-commerce on top, and it doesn't really work. But to change ship options, to change where packages are flowing in a warehouse can be a lot of work. You have to change a WMS, you have to change an OMS, you have to change a website, you have to change the customer experience, ship options. It's a complex thing. And I've worked with organizations that don't have a single system of record. They have like 5 systems of record, right? So you have to change them in all different places. There is no one place to make a change. So when we started talking about shipping and no code, this really looked like an opportunity that would give flexibility, not just in a warehouse and not just in trucking, but offer flexibility all the way up into the customer experience on the website.
When we were talking about this, it was right that moment when capacity actually ran out.
Yeah.
And I really like the scenario that you kind of opened my eyes to, where you would know it was happening in your warehouse.
Right.
You might be able to tell your boss and handle the situation locally, but it took a lot of conversations that rapidly got escalated in a lot of boardrooms until maybe the CEO of the company had to write a letter.
Yes.
And I think that picture of the impact, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah. And so, a lot of times what happens is that it's really the warehouse that's aware of the capacity issue the first, or the logistics manager, right? All of a sudden the truck doesn't show up. They get a call from their rep. Bigger companies like Amazon and Walmart, not so much of an issue, right? But smaller companies, we saw some of that during this holiday peak season as well. I know I talked to a few companies during this past peak season where I got phone calls like on December 15th going, oh my God, UPS just flat out refused to pick up our packages. What do we do? We heard you're the guru. What do we do? And I'm like, well, I can work a lot of magic, but I don't think I can make UPS come pick up your packages if they said no. And so what it did is it paralyzed people and it paralyzed companies because they weren't able to potentially shift to another carrier quickly in order to get their packages picked up. They weren't able to change things as simple as label printing because it's a different, maybe the label's a little bit different, or they need to put a different account number on it. So all of this sort of tactical things that happen in the warehouse were now bleeding or bubbling back up into the CEO level, because the people who were calling me were the CEOs that were like, hey, well, my guy says that UPS won't pick up our packages anymore. What do we do? And I'm like, well, the first thing you need to do is tell your customers that the packages are going to be late.
Yeah, time to write that letter.
Yeah, time to write that letter. I'm sorry. I know you don't want to do it, but trust me, there's a whole dogs not barking philosophy I'll tell you about sometime. But it was.
Yeah. So the package stuff, it was definitely an event, right? I just want to shift into reverse logistics because we did talk a lot about that. Sounds like that's going to be going on in a very similar way for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you see the carriers that are floating around, yes, it's going to be a while.
So what do you? So maybe we can shift into the whole reverse logistics idea.
Yeah, the reverse logistics thing, what we've talked about is a lot of what happens with reverse logistics when companies aren't prepared for it is that, they're called what's called blind returns, right? So that's what we call them in the 3PL and logistics industry, and that they just come back. They're, you don't get an RMA. Amazon is probably one of the companies that comes to mind that does sort of a virtual RMA. You go and you log in that you're sending it back. They, send a little barcode. That's why you put the barcode in your box. So when they get there, they can scan it and they know that it's coming. And then they have technology that allows them to know that they have inventory coming back and they can plan for it. A lot of companies don't have that. Again, talking about retail organizations, especially older and established ones, just because this wasn't part of their headspace. And so what happens is that when you're looking at a 50% return rate, and let's be honest, when you buy a pair of shoes online, right? Most people buy 2 pair, half size apart, right? Because I don't know what's going to fit. So that is a 50% return rate, guaranteed. So what happens is that the company doesn't know that this is coming back. They maybe have planned for a 20% return rate, a 30% return rate. Now we're seeing much higher return rates because so many people are doing buying online. But it doesn't get fed all the way back up to things like buying and planning. So the warehouse has a pile of stuff. They see it. Customers are calling. They want their money back. People in the warehouse are freaking out. They got trailers stacked up full of stuff. But the buyer potentially is saying, woo, I sold 80% of my goods. I'm going to order some more. Well, guess what?
Keep on flowing.
Now we've got 50% of what you just sold is sitting in a container out there in the parking lot at the warehouse. Now we're overstocked. Now we have to liquidate, and that impacts profits. That impacts customer experience. Just the impacts of this. It's an octopus with tentacles.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Octopus with tentacles.
We talked about. I'm going to mix metaphors. I was just going to go to that piling up. Well, because the piling up thing is also really important, where you literally have these impacts that people keep, and it was, you mentioned the built-in 50% return on something. There are situations where your product itself is being returned almost 100% because it just isn't the right thing. Something's wrong, and you wouldn't. How long is it before people can actually begin to take that action or know about it?
So this is the super scary part. And I've worked on some projects specifically around this. And this is going to break your heart a little bit. Months. 3-4 months in order, depending on how a company is running its reverse logistics. So the first thing is that because no one values the return, right? Reverse logistics are almost always put on the slow boat, right? The slowest, cheapest way to get it back to the warehouse. And a lot of times that it means it's being sent to the closest distribution center. The distribution center consolidates it for a couple of weeks. They put it on a container that goes back to the warehouse. And so it's this long process. So I've worked on processes that have been 3 months. That's something, especially if you start mixing a store in there. So I actually took it to the store to get it returned. Right. We can't sell it in the store. So we're looking at 3 months. And that, some people out there might be like, well, that's not so bad if you plan for it. But let's talk about like high fashion retail, right? Let's talk about seasonal product. If you're doing 4 turns a year, that means you have about 8 to 10 weeks to full price sell your product. So if you're using, cheap shipping to get it to your customer, let's say you're taking 10 days to get it to your customer takes a week or 2 to make a decision. And then it's going to sit for 6 to 8 weeks trying to get back into your warehouse to a sellable location. You had one opportunity to sell that at full price. One. That is a slow death for a company right there.
You guys turned me on to all kinds of reverse logistics reading, and right, Steph, you found one that was the keep it trend.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that was the whole thing. Just to avoid Amazon, Walmart, depending on the product, they'll tell you just to keep it.
Yeah.
Period. Well, I just had a situation, I don't know, a month ago, we ordered one of those heaters for outside, and it took months and months and months and months and months. And finally my husband canceled it, right? Well, it was already en route. So we canceled it and we got to keep it simultaneously.
So,
It was free.
so Kim and Steph and the whole UC Boss team, by the way, who are legions more expert on supply chain, gave me a little bit of an education. And I'm going to attempt to pass on to you guys, how does data, no code, and agility fit into the world of reverse logistics? So I believe I've just shared my screen, and this is a little bit about it. So now see Matt perform a feat of describing a use case to experts. But the piece that's there is what do we do? How do we bring these worlds? Just like we started off, Kim is so expert in the industry, the data and the information expertise is coming into its fore. So the first way we think about it, and I really thought about it when this is being described as these two completely separate processes. Things are coming down into the consumer through many, many systems, and there's a lot you can optimize in there. And so, by the way, when we talked about use cases where this has an impact, there are many within just any one of these areas. But this is so dramatic because there's an entirely separate return. And as Kim said, some of these people do make linkages between them. But I, just like you, I had an experience where, I put a label on a box, and until that box showed up at the warehouse, they were not going to understand that I even had returned it. And that's very common. And so that starting point is first one of the delays, but there's so much information that could be matched up, and it just isn't being matched up between not just the beginning of the process, but all the other steps. I have a reverse logistics process there. I now have come to understand that's a very complicated set of refurbishing, repackaging, reselling, getting value from that inventory as it flows back. And as Steph said, so we had up to 6 months. I found somebody, Kim, that said it could be 6 months without knowing. And of course, it could be less, but that's still a tremendous amount of time to not understand what's happening. And there's so much value locked up in it. So the time, which leads to that backing up process, and then the value. And then Steph, you really pointed out this idea that if returns were big in 2020, they're going to keep growing. And so everything you do, all this value, it triples. If you have this 41 billion idea of the value is a tremendous amount of in the industry. And we think it's sort of a Deloitte looking at US industry. That's a tremendous that's locked away. So that's kind of the problem. And what we're thinking about is thinking about data. How can we apply what we just talked about in this environment? How can we bring it together? And there are a couple of things. And again, this is coming from a perspective of using a tool like UC Boss that understands the data, where you can actually connect to existing systems, connect across them. You're not replacing these systems. You're bridging the gap and connecting to them. And instead of looking at the particular WMS and the particular order management system or exactly how it's described in the ERP, what you're getting is now a sense of the sales, the inventories, the actual products, the shipping. And you can add to that now, because you can make these connections, you can add to that a sense of the returns. What's actually happening as a data world. So now you'll be able to bring it together. And this is just one example where data can play such a fundamental role. But it also, when it comes to my original point about data, it's about understanding the data and the data objects, not just copying data, moving it between systems. And that's something that you can do in this kind of environment. But you need to be able to take action on it. And the no-code environment is then about being able to realize and use that data, that enterprise valid data where you have these objects like sales and returns, and do things like build a workflow to automate the notification. You understand a return's coming in. Now, we haven't done the whole trick like Amazon where everything's linked together. We're allowing these processes to happen. But because in the system, somebody knows, hey, look, I can see a return. I can also see the fact that there are orders coming out there. Let's go through a couple processes. If things are looking bad, let's actually start to notify our e-commerce team. Let's let people know. Let's maybe send a note to the buyer. That person doing all this is not a developer. There's not the long cycle of specifications, data modeling, middleware development, UI, let's make a whole application. Because it's taking place in an environment of no code, that's somebody who is an expert, a domain expert, maybe a citizen developer, somebody who can put together these tools. Even I was able to do it. But that is actually something where, that's something that's very powerful when you can actually show how you can create these kinds of workflows. And you'll notice there's one more thing going on here, which they're now arrows going back out. So data, when it's connected properly and at an enterprise level, data starts flowing between systems, and you can automate things, or you can build views and allow people to make better decisions. And that gets back to some of our ideas around creating a really great view for one person. Maybe we want to go ahead and take an action or send a notification based on a specific event and spot the problem faster. Maybe change the open to buy plan. Go ahead and just actually stop buying something that's backing up. And then overall work on that whole value question on the inventory. And that kind of gets us to the idea of agility. So if you can do that, if you can bring up systems, make solutions to bridge specific gaps without going into a long tail of 3 or 4 months development, you're getting a lot of agility. The other thing that's really important about this environment, and particularly how we're connecting to the data, as things change, you also get agility, because you may have a situation, and of course this happens, right? You bring up a new warehouse management system, maybe a new warehouse on the, your business is evolving, and these strategies allow you to actually maintain or quickly alter and update systems and processes as things change. Or maybe you're with an organization that handles this kind of process for multiple customers, completely different systems, but you could use this approach to build consistent processes and actually create solutions that kind of survive how your customers change or how your own environment changes. And this is kind of what is a little bit of a challenge, but I hope the picture makes sense. We've got very different systems connecting with data, using NoCode to put it in action. And we're really seeing what it means to be agile in an environment where you also have to be precise, you have to be accurate, you have to be an enterprise. And I think that's a big mix, it's a big ask. And it's something that I've seen, not many tools, but it's not just a tool set, not many approaches can really get you there. And I think this is a mix of good approaches. And Steph, we were going to just think about a little bit about how this matches out what we're hearing from people.
Absolutely. Really what we're hearing from organizations is they need to be able to leverage their investment of their supply chain. Nobody can just rip stuff out and replace it. Nobody has the money. Nobody has any of that. How can we leverage what we have? How can we make it real time? And this not only visible, but actionable, right? If we have to wait 30 days or 60 days in order to react to the inventory, it's a problem, right? We need to be able to react to these things in real time. And then having a single unified platform that allows the users to have their own environment, to have their own needs, and to expand those. That's what we see. Go ahead.
No, they're just saying there's a nice mix of need in the overall situation in supply chain and new technology that's emerging to help solve some of these problems.
Which we're thrilled about. So Kim, tell me, does this all...
Sorry, there you go. No, go ahead. We're good.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So right, you read my mind as you're driving correctly. So really, what's next? We covered a lot, and we're starting to draw to a close here. But what do you think are the biggest factors, or what do you think's next? Kim, could you what's the future look like for us?
Let me get my crystal ball out. It's funny. So first and foremost, and I think everyone understands this, but direct to consumer is here to stay. Once everything is over and we're able to go out, I think a lot of people have discovered the conveniences of sitting on your butt and doing your grocery shopping. And they've also do they understand the conveniences now? They've also built trust in these things. Because they had to. Historically, there were certain things that people would not do online because they didn't trust it. Grocery is a great example. Adoption previous to the pandemic of online grocery shopping was fairly slow. And a lot of the biggest pushback people gave was around produce, right? They said, I want to pick out my own bananas. I have a specific shade of yellow that I like to buy my bananas in. And, so as a result, it was worth it for them to go and pick out their own avocados, their own bananas, whatever their situation was. So DTC is here to stay. The other reason DTC is here to stay, I have been doing a lot of work with the Virginia seafood industry and helping a lot of the watermen here in Virginia figure out how to sell their product online. What has happened, especially with high-end proteins, is that consume and vegetables, actually everything, most produce, is that people are becoming aware of where it comes from, who grows it, where did it come from, who's the guy who did it. I want to buy directly from him. Consumers are connecting directly with the brands now versus traditionally you connected with the retailer. Also, we see this in the fashion industry, right? I no longer have to go to a Macy's or a Bergdorf's to buy my Givenchy bag. I can actually go to Givenchy directly and buy it. I can go to Chanel and buy stuff that I want. I don't have to go through a retailer to have access to these things. So direct to consumer is here to stay on all levels. I think the other thing is that we are starting to appreciate supply chain more and what it means. It's all over the news. I go on the news every morning and somebody's talking about supply chain, specifically around vaccines. People are starting to understand that there is a process behind the shelf. And they're curious about it. They want to know what it means, what the impact to our environment is, why I can't get something, where is it in the process? So I think in general, DTC is going to continue to rule the world. And people are going to continue to care about supply chain, how it got there, where it's going to go, when am I going to get it? They care more about that now than they ever have in the past because it's directly impacting their lives.
Absolutely. And like you said, some of those packages, I received my Valentine's Day gift for my husband 4 weeks after I ordered it. I got it last week.
Well, hold on, wait a minute. It was your Valentine's gift for you from your husband that you ordered?
No.
Yeah.
For my husband that I ordered.
Oh.
I was sure it was the first one.
No, I didn't order myself.
Before I talk a little bit about where, kind of same thing, reflection on the future, I do want to make sure the audience we'd like to hear from you guys about, so if you have any questions or comments, we're really happy to take them. There's a Q&A tab and you can go ahead and type something in there and we'll be more than happy to take that.
Ask away.
We need
some questions. Okay.
So Kim, I think you're talking the trend. To me, those trends drive so much in terms of so much potential in terms of system. I don't want to say rethinking, right? Because again, and this is an approach that we're thinking about, it's about augmenting and building and connecting within these systems. You can't build a new, you can't radically reinvent the supply chain. You have to continually improve it. You have to continually optimize it. You have to look for those places where information and data could really help avoid that backing up, could really help make it possible to get the efficiency you need to go to this kind of massive one-to-one direct-to-consumer. If I'm starting to order one thing from one person, it starts to look really differently when I walked out there and did it myself. That it's such I just don't know whether people, I know you guys are all in this world, but I'm coming into it. It still amazes me how much the consumer did in the older model. How much we walked around and we were this amazing part of the distribution pipeline that's radically changing. And I know it won't stay this way forever, but we're in it now. And all of that kind of adds up when I think about the opportunity, it adds up to this next kind of phase on it. So if we're talking about data, putting data into action with NoCode, there's a real possibility to add to that predict side, add to the staying ahead side. I think we made it this far in a whole webinar that was technology oriented, talked about data, and we didn't say anything about machine learning or AI, which I think is to our credit because this is very hands-on. But there is automation, there is a lot of potential that comes after or that's there if we can make these first couple of steps. And that's something I'm really excited about because staying ahead, I'm stealing your mantra, Kim, but staying ahead in supply chain is everything, and it's now it has to scale. You can imagine a couple of places where you could tune things, then you can really start to think about a supply chain that's aware and evolving. And I think that's a really great potential. And it's a nice vision to have out there when you're working on the things you're doing now because they're connected. what you do now can really lay those groundwork components, getting the data, thinking about putting it in action. And we're introducing this idea of NoCode to get those early results. But I think it's going to have a big impact down the line.
Yeah. I think the other thing that NoCode is offering that's really key to the market right now is speed. Because things are shifting so quickly. And, a lot of companies that did not adopt DTC early on are having to move fast and try to catch up with the market. Right. If you're taking 6 months to build a robust online e-commerce business in this market today, you're getting eclipsed. You're done. You're not going to make it. You have to be able to move a lot faster in today's environment.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, let's see what our audience is asking us. Hopefully there's some questions.
Absolutely. Okay, let's start with the first question. What do we have here? Okay. Reverse logistics. How does UC Boss, or the approach of implementing UC Boss, really different from commercial off-the-shelf vendors, solutions?
Yeah, the kind of idea that you could just have a system that's going to handle this piece, and that's that one.
Exactly.
So the biggest thing, so I've learned a lot, but it's that these situations that companies develop are highly customized, or highly tailored. Customization sounds like a bad thing. Tailoring something to optimize it for your situation is exactly what you need to do. That leads you into a lot of complexity that you need to be able to handle if you want to start to work across it. What it really means is that you can't just buy something one size fits all and put it in place. You can buy something one size fits all and then refit it, which is what a lot of people do. And that's actually why I think this idea of thinking about the data, thinking about no-code tools to get the agility, I think it's a really good fit, because it does mean it can be now, use the word customized, but it can be tailored to match your environment, because that's how you use it. You can't just install it. You have to actually tailor it to the environment. So it's a big difference. And the big thing is that a lot of the existing systems, like the existing situation is very, very different. One organization to another, one part of an organization to another part of the organization. And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir about supply chain experts, but that's something I learned from you guys. So hopefully I got it right.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, next question. Is the solution to outsource reverse logistics, or is it to recreate the process with no-code solutions to give them visibility, RMA, and actionable insights?
So I think that's a Kim and I question, because
exactly.
I think that we propose the idea of being able to use this data and no-code to create better insights and actionable insights within your company. Mm-hmm. Kim, I'd be interested in your take on outsourcing or other ways to attack the problem.
Yeah, there's a few solutions out there today that are outsourcing your returns, and most of them, what they're selling is the fact that they can do it faster. And that's the actual physical process that they can do faster. So some of the thing, and those are great solutions. And I think for some companies, those solutions really work. But the reality is that most companies already have the systems and the data to manage reverse logistics, right? We already have a WMS, we already have an OMS, we already have a buying and planning tool and an ERP. And we can do that. So you already have what you need, right? You just need to connect the systems differently. And that is what NoCode is bringing to the table, is that you don't have to go buy another solution. You don't have to go outsource it. You just need to connect what you already have in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yep. Steph, I'm looking at the clock. I think we probably should go for a big finish.
Exactly. We're ready.
Right.
Are you ready?
There's the big finish, folks.
The big finish. What's next? Well, what's next is we're ready to do some demos. So please reach out and let us know who would like to see a demo of the product. And in May, we will be working with Supply Chain Now and having our next roundtable. We're hoping that it might be in person. We'll see. Like everything else, it's all in person. Did you see how excited she got? We're all excited leaving the house. So let's hope that actually happens. And then Kim has a lot of work to do after this. So we have the first 50 people who attended will actually get to have 30 minutes of Kim's time. She's been known to stretch that a little bit here and there. She's a pretty flexible lady. So
yep. So, so for all of you who attended, thank you so much. I'll be reaching out to you on email with a link to a calendar for you to book some time with me. It's actually 45 minutes. There's no way that we can cover anything in 30 minutes. And so I'm looking forward to talking with you. There'll be a couple of questions that you need to answer just so I can prepare for our conversation. But, as we talked about, I've been really deep in this industry for a long time. And I have a lot of thoughts on how things can be improved quickly. So I'm looking forward to speaking to you and learning about what some of your challenges are and trying to give you some quick hit solutions.
It's wonderful. And you will be also getting the invites from us, certainly through LinkedIn and email for our event later on. So we're looking forward to the next event and hoping you all will attend. We thank you very much for your time and hope you all have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steph. Thank you so much, Kim. It's great.
Thank you, Kim.
Great talking with you.
Thank you, Matt.